Welcome to another Walter Football video. I'm Charlie Campebll, Senior Draft Analyst. Today I thought we'd get into some more draft theory. If you want to refer back, we got into some draft theory videos I did in the past, like how one draft mistake causes a domino effect that leads to more draft mistakes and more busted picks, which is why you have some of the same teams picking in the top 10 every year. So, with that in mind, I felt let's get into some other draft theory. Let's look at some draft theory of success here. And now, one of the things that I think becomes apparent when you study the draft year after year is that when you draft from the strength of the draft, the strong positions at the draft, teams end up getting rewarded with the talent they're getting in the second and third round in the second day of the draft, where really the men are separated from the boys in terms of the GMs and the rosters in the NFL. That's where first round picks are pretty much universally loved in the scouting community. They all like those players, whether it's a top 10 guy or even a late first rounder. Those guys are getting graded highly across the league. But the second, third round grade, that's where you'll have some big variety in opinions and where you're going to have teams that get some huge steals and other teams where they don't do well on the second, third round. They don't have fundamentally sound teams in terms of good talent at different positions, and they lack depth. So drafting from the strength of the draft of positions leads to good values on day two. That's kind of our thesis here. So to look at it, I figured let's look at some of the drafts from early in the decade, and rather than some of the more recent drafts where things can change. Some players develop slowly, others just hit the ground running. So let's look at some drafts where we've had real time to see how things have panned out. So let's look at 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014. So 2011, that draft was an excellent draft, probably the best this decade overall. But real position of strength in that draft was edge rusher. There was a great year, and we haven't had one since with that amount of talent for edge rusher. So let's look at the top 20. Von Miller went high in the top 5. Aldon Smith went in the top 10 as well. Outside the top 10, J.J. Watt to the Texans, Robert Quinn to the Rams, Ryan Kerrigan to the Redskins, and Adrian Claiborne to the Bucks. Claiborne kind of the disappointment in that group. But then, so that's still overall a very talented group. That's a really good class of edge rushers for the top 20 picks. Now look at the late first round. Look at the values there. Cam Jordan and Cam Hayward, both who are playing really well into their 30s here. And as a bit of an aside, when I was with Pewter Report back then in 2011, I wrote the Bucks should have taken Cam Jordan at the time of the draft and not Claiborne, and that one was definitely proven right. Cam Jordan's been a hell of a player for the Saints. But all of that aside, anyways, you see those were really good values late in the first round. If there weren't so many good players to go in the top 20, then some teams would have taken Cam Jordan or Cam Hayward higher. They would have never gotten to the Saints and Steelers. So they got some really good values right there. But it goes into day two as well. In day two, you had Jabal Sheard, Brooks Reed in the second round. Solid pros. Brooks Reed had some good years for the Texans and Eagles. Then you had Justin Houston, who was a stud pass rusher, one of the best edge rushers in the NFL. He goes in the third round to the Saints. And you have Alan Bailey go in the third round, who isn't a stud, but he's a solid pro and a good starter during his career. So you see right there that good talent got pushed down into day two, and the teams that drew on the strength of the draft were able to come away with players that maybe would have gone a round or two higher in other seasons. All right, so now let's jump to 2012. That draft, strength of that draft was linebacker. You had Luke Kuechly and Dante Hightower go in the first round. But then on day two in the mid-rounds, you had some really good values. You had Bobby Wagner with the Seahawks, just a stud linebacker. Zach Brown led the league in tackles at one point, turned into a solid pro. Levante David with Tampa Bay, he's a stud. Has been a great player for the Bucs. Has had a great career for them. And then in the mid rounds, there were good values: Nigel Bradham, Tahir Whitehead, Brandon Marshall. So once again, you see, typically in the draft, you have one, maybe two inside linebackers in the first round, non-pass rushing linebackers, and then they tend to fall lower, not that many in the second round either. But this year, 2012, was an anomaly in that regard, and the teams that drafted at those positions were rewarded with some good players, all right? So now let's look at 2013, which was a terrible draft overall for talent. You had a ton of guys that were busted picks high in the first round, like say Deion Jordan, Luke Jokel. Even the number one overall pick, Eric Fisher, has been a solid pro, but probably not what you would expect for a number one overall pick. It's not like he's one of the best left tackles in the NFL. He's solid, but not elite or great. But regardless, that even though that draft was bad, you still have good players in every draft. You can have a down year for the draft, and you're still going to find some good players. It's just going to happen. And even then, you still have some positions, even in a down year like 2013, that have some decent depth to them. So that year, the strength was tight end. You had Zach Ertz go in the second round. You had Travis Kelce in the third round, Jordan Reed in the third round, Vance McDonald, I think it was mid-day 2 there, late 2, early 3rd. So even in that draft class that did not have a lot of good players in the first round, it still had a strength in teams that drafted there, like the Eagles and the Chiefs came away with 2 excellent pros. Jordan Reed was a really good player for the Redskins when he was healthy before the injuries kind of set him off track. But still, you see once again, even in a bad draft, you go to the positions of strength and you're getting some good value. So now 2014, this will be our last example, wide receiver. Wide receiver, I was joking with a scout, I think a few weeks ago, it seems like wide receivers loaded every year. College football is just pumping them out like crazy. But 2014 was really a draft that was just known to be a great year at receiver heading into it, and it's turned out to be that way. So you look in the first round, in the top 20, there were 4 receivers. You had Sammy Watkins, Mike Evans, Odell Beckham Jr., Brandon Cooks, all go in the top 20. 3 of those are excellent pros. Brandon Cooks is basically a journeyman at this point. But at the same time, he wasn't a bust or anything. The Saints got a first-round pick for him. The Patriots did as well. The Rams came away with a second-round pick for him. So even though he's been moved around, he hasn't been a total waste or bust. But at any rate, day 2, you had all those guys go in the first. Now look at these values. You had Devontae Adams in the second round, Allen Robinson, Jarvis Landry. Those 3 have been excellent pros, especially for where they went in the draft. John Brown went later in the late 3rd, turned into a really nice pro, first with the Cardinals and then Ravens and now Bills. Now, it wasn't completely without some disappointments. In that second round, you had Jordan Matthews, Marquise Lee, and Paul Richardson. Some guys who've had some flashes here and there, but in terms of NFL careers, you'd probably say they were disappointments for the teams that drafted them overall. So, but still, when you have that top-tier talent, those guys going in the first round, like Evans, Watkins, Beckham, Cooks, that pushes guys down into day 2 who in a different year probably would have gone in the first, like Devontae Adams and Allen Robinson. So, really, to me, that's one of the lessons we can see by looking back through the draft year after year, is that when you draft at the position of strength, you're going to improve the talent of your overall roster because you're getting better values on day 2. So then those guys help make your team more talented when you're going up against others who haven't been doing that. So who've been maybe reaching at a position or just not making wise decisions in terms of their grades and where they're stacking their board and evaluating players. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Check our links below. We got updated mocks from Walt and I, updated prospect position rankings, new updates in the hot press each week, talking about which prospects are impressing scouts, and we have tons more coverage. Walt's weekly picks. You have other fantasy updates. Walt's right on the ball on all of that, and Walt's picks definitely. I love those articles. They're great. He won over $2,000 last year, so they're great reads, and definitely. You can maybe win some money from listening to them. I know I should have, but I'm just I can't afford to lose it, so I did it. But anyways, check out our links below. Check out Walter Football for us. You can follow me on Twitter at Draft Campebll. Follow Walt at Walter Football. You can please share this video, send it around to your fellow draftnicks. I'd really appreciate it. Hit the notification bell. I'll be back with you guys soon. Thanks for watching.